Welcome back to the Four Corners Sports Block. This is Rico Block. I have with me Matt Young, one of the owners of the Durango Martial Arts Academy right here in Durango, Colorado. And a little bit of background on you in the first segment. Now we want to talk about the specifics. And if you could start, briefly tell us the difference between the different types of martial arts. Because my understanding would be that, judo is the same as jiu-jitsu, but it's not. And that's different than karate, which is different than kung fu. So just briefly sort of describe what those differences are for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is primarily the martial art that I train in, is a grappling martial art. Traditionally, it doesn't teach punches and kicks and different strikes. It focuses on throws, pinning and controlling people on the ground, and then submitting them with either joint locks like an arm bar or a leg lock or different types of chokes.
And do you have to have any kind of wrestling background to be proficient at this?
Absolutely not. No, it's a complete martial art in and of itself. A wrestling background certainly helps. If you train for 5 years in wrestling and 5 years in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, depending on how focused your training is, then you would both be very, very competent grapplers.
So compare that to, say, judo.
Mm-hmm. And judo is sort of the opposite side of the same coin as jiu-jitsu, where judo focuses a lot more on the stand-up aspects of the fight, how they're going to get the person to the ground, and jiu-jitsu focuses once you hit the ground. So it's all the emphasis. Originally, they started as pretty much the same martial art, and then those who emphasized the groundwork more kind of branched off into jiu-jitsu, and those who worked on stand-up more branched off into judo. So if you watch high-level judo versus high-level jiu-jitsu, you'll just really notice a difference. The judo guys, their throws and their trips are picture perfect, whereas jiu-jitsu guys, once they hit the ground, they are doing the most elaborate and intricate reversals and submissions and setting them up, many moves ahead.
And so compare that to karate and kung fu.
So in karate and kung fu, the emphasis is going to be on striking, and there's kind of two real main camps in the martial arts world, and there's one camp that is the martial arts that spar a lot. Every single training session involves some type of sparring. And then there's the martial arts that don't. They rely more on kata, which kata is choreographed movements and practicing in the air, those movements. And the difference between the ones that spar and the ones that don't spar becomes really apparent. Because whenever you spar a martial art all the time, you can perform those movements, those techniques against a fully resisting opponent whenever the opponent is trying to harm you just as badly as you're trying to harm them. And the techniques that you rely on become simpler, they become quicker, they become more fluid. You have to develop things like timing. You have to develop understanding of the force needed to apply the technique. And karate and kung fu, over many, many years, and once it came over to the United States, especially after World War II, took out a lot of the sparring elements. And so what you'll find is guys that can do a lot of beautiful kata, but when they actually spar against a live resisting opponent, then they haven't had time to develop the techniques that work against real opponents.
So let's talk about the different belts. Mm-hmm. And let's keep it specific to what you're doing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So when somebody first starts out, what are the belts and what do they have to do to get to the next level of belt?
So in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the different levels of belts begin at white belt Then we have blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, and black belt. So there's only 5 belts, which is a lot fewer than a lot of martial arts. Some martial arts have belts of every single color of the rainbow. But in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, every belt takes quite a long time to reach. You really have to earn every belt that you get. And typically for a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, the average is about 10 years of training. So some people do it in 8, some people do it in 13, but that black belt means sort of a absolute level of skill,
And do they have to be in competitions, or is it judged by their instructor, or how is it judged to go from one level to the next?
So the instructor is the one who is going to decide when you're ready for the next belt. And the way they decide that is through your sparring, whenever you actually grapple with other people in class. And so it doesn't really require us to have tests, because every time you engage with your partner, it's like a test, and I can grapple with my student, and I can see what they know. Are they doing this right? Are they doing that right? Are they where they should be for, say, if they're a white belt, to become a blue belt? And there's specific things that we look for at each belt, like what are these guys doing whenever we decide to promote them.
And what level belt are you at now?
I have a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and so I've been training about 10 years. I've competed a lot in Jiu-Jitsu tournaments. Competition is not a requisite for getting promoted, but it certainly helps, because again, we get to see exactly what and we get to see what you can do in a high stress situation like a competition. So it helps a lot whenever guys compete. But we have a lot of guys who don't compete, and they can still move through the belts the same as anybody else.
How much training does it take as far as time, in the 30 seconds before we need to take another break,